Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and I'm here with author Zamil and a bunch of friends to talk about Gunmetal Gods. Where we were talking before we went live, and gush mode is activated. So prepare
Yeah.
yourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's
Oh,
we kind of
nice.
yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, we're all going
I
to
have
group.
FOMO.
So
I ordered mine. It's not here yet. This is my Kindle version, all right?
yeah. So if you want us to kick us off, Zamil, with the introduction and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm Zamil Akhtar, author of Gunmetal Gods, as well as the sequel Conqueror's Blood and the prequel Death Rider. I live in Dubai. Um, I've been here 5 years. I'm trying to, you know, become a full-time author. I do also have a day job, but I'm trying to like transition into becoming a full-time author. Yeah, and I write mainly dark fantasy, grim dark. Gunmetal Gods was my debut, so I'm just excited to be here to chat about it. Um, yeah, that's pretty much what you need to know.
Lana, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Lana from the booktube channel Lore and Lullabies. I currently reside in Australia and it's midnight here, but there was absolutely no way that I was missing this chat.
And Taylor.
I'm Taylor. So my booktube channel is Maed Between the Pages. And since we're rounding off where we're from in time zones, I live in Japan. So it is 11 p.m. here. But just like Lana, I was not going to miss this. So I'm really excited to talk about Gunmetal Gods. I'm ready.
Awesome. And Stuart.
Hi, I'm PL Stuart. I'm an epic fantasy author, currently of A Drowned Kingdom and the Drowned Kingdom Saga, a 7-book series. I'm also an assistant editor with the wonderful Before We Go blog, led by the awesome Beth Tabler. And I wouldn't miss this either. It's 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time here in Canada. And Gunmetal Gods it was just a phenomenal book. And probably going to be, I know it's really early and presumptuous, but probably be one of my top 10 reads of the year, I predict. So I know it's early. It's only January, but we'll see.
I said the same thing. So Zamil, if you want to, what were your just kick us off on what inspired you to write this story?
Yeah, so Gunmetal Gods came into fruition when I was talking with a friend, and this was during the final season of Game of Thrones, and we were kind of talking like, what if there was a story very similar to Game of Thrones in terms of the themes, in terms of the different elements that it has, except it was set in a Middle Eastern setting, Middle Eastern inspired setting. That was just kind of the idea from which it germinated. And after I had that one conversation with my friend, I just went home and I started writing like the first chapter, and it just came out of that. And I also added some of my other things other kind of tropes that I really enjoy, such as the Lovecraftian elements, and it's a lot more high fantasy, I'd say, than Game of Thrones as well. So it just kind of came out of me as a hodgepodge of all the different things that I personally enjoyed, and by the end of the process, I think I guess it was something pretty unique in the sense that a lot of people say they've never read like a dark fantasy with a Middle Eastern setting. So yeah, that's kind of that was kind of the whole, I guess, premise of Gunmetal Gods.
It's definitely, you can definitely feel the different. It was a unique viewpoint. You view this world from a different lens.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was the thing kind of pushing me on to write it, because prior to writing the book, I was only writing horror, and I was just writing horror short stories. And when I would think about writing an epic fantasy, it just seemed way too difficult. Like you have to make up a whole world, you have to make up, countries and languages and the history has to go back like, thousands of years. It's just like too much. It's too overwhelming. But the idea that I was doing something kind of new, something kind of different, is what pushed me on.
That's crazy to hear that you're like, the history and the languages and the culture, it's just all too much, because on paper, it's just comes across so effortless. Like it honestly does. I would never have thought that that was like your take on writing like a fantasy.
I think definitely when I got into it, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would, um, because it was like, it was an act of creation, and it was also kind of mixing together a lot of my interests and, a lot of the things I personally nerd out about, and kind of remixing those things. So I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would, and I'm glad. Not now, the way I think of writing fantasy, now it actually doesn't seem, that daunting after writing, a few books. So yeah, I'm glad I took the step, I guess.
I actually want to second what Lana just said, that it was really captivating, like the background to it. And I think for me, something that I've always loved but recently been really into is like the idea of meddling gods, the gods that just decide that humans are fun to mess with. And this book was so good for that. It was top tier. So I have to say that like historical aspect where they, the gods, where they came from, why they do what they do, that was one of my favorite aspects of this whole book. So I don't know, how much of that was difficult to research or how much of that, just flowed easily. But either way, it was a really, really awesome aspect of the book. I ate that up.
Yeah, just if I can just add to what Taylor and Lana have said, I don't know. I mean, I'm telling you, Zamil, the effortless way that you wove in the lore and the history and the backstory. Taki's my favorite poet now, even though I've never read him, and it was just for someone like me who world building is a really important aspect to me when I read a novel. It's really critical for fantasy for me, and yours was simply astounding. I'm flabbergasted that you're saying that. Oh well, I found it daunting. Well, as the two ladies just said, you certainly didn't look like it. So
Yeah, I think, writers approach world building in different ways, and a lot of people, they'll sit and they'll just plan everything out and be very meticulous about how the world is. Whereas for me, it was more like, you know, while I was writing the story, these ideas just kind of came to me. And that's kind of how all of Gunmetal Gods went. It wasn't so much something that I planned out meticulously beforehand, because that just seemed way too daunting to me. It just seemed like I'd have to open a Word document and type like 50,000 words just to plan the novel. And it just seemed like no. So, and, it was kind of new to me to approach writing a book in a not sort of pre-planned way. So I myself was kind of surprised that it turned out the way it did. Um, so yeah, I can't. I guess I can't say more than that, because it was just, something that just came out of me. And I wrote the whole first draft in like a month as well. So it was just literally me just sitting there, just like banging on the keyboard for a whole month nonstop, just like I have to get all this stuff down. So that's just how it went.
That's awesome.
I love that image. I love that. Just get it out while it's fresh, right?
Yeah.
yeah, it's this
And
thing
do it
with
later.
creatives that it's cliche, but you just feel like you have this thing bursting to get out of you sometimes, and you go on those tears where you just write obsessively and you can't stop. And then sometimes, of course, you're cold and you don't have inspiration. But judging by your work, Zamil, I mean, the fact that you said, okay, you banged out a first draft in a month, like, wow, like I'm wondering if you did a lot of revisions with that, because the finished product is amazing. So I'm not sure how many times you revised it, but
I revised it so many times. It felt like the revision process would never end. Because it's like while I was writing the book, I was also learning how to write a book, in a sense. So every draft would be very different from the previous draft, and I'd just go over it again and again and again and again. And I had a lot of beta readers and an editor, and it was just something that went through so many iterations. Um, but the final product is still similar to the first draft, in on the macro level, on like the level of the forest, but the specifics, like I think every line of dialogue was rewritten at some point. So it was a long and drawn out revision process for sure.
Mm.
I know we haven't gotten into any specifics yet, and I know Steve mentioned the disclaimer that there will be spoilers. But if this is too early to ask this question, it's fine. But you're just talking about revisions, and I've always wondered: is there like one scene or one conversation you had that you really didn't want to get rid of, like it was like your baby, but because of the way revisions work, you had to say goodbye to that scene? Was there any scene like that, or did it make it into the final cut? I'm just really curious.
See, for me, the problem wasn't, for some authors, the problem is overwriting. For me, it was more like I was just like, the story was just flying at a ridiculous pace. So I actually went in each draft and had to slow down the story, and add scenes. So I think I only took out 2 scenes that from the first draft, and they weren't things that I cared about very much. And I must have added in like an insane amount of dialogue. I just stretched, especially the scenes where characters are talking about each other. Every revision, I just make them more detailed and add in more description. So for me, it was kind of the opposite. It was like I had to add more in each time, and it's still kind of you know, it still ended up being really fast paced. But yeah, the first draft was even more fast paced.
That was a great question, Taylor, by the way. Let's just catch up on some chats really quick. Working Man Reads, Josh is here. He's in the Eastern time zone too. Says, I literally just bought this book on audio and Kindle yesterday. This is really random, so I'm going to have to check out this live. And
Cool.
Fine Reads is here. And Fine Reads is one of the channels that I saw this book mentioned on. So kudos to that.
Feed.
Yeah. And this is so impressive. Your world is so cohesive. And you can't see that at all, that you didn't plan it up front.
Mm.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially with like the depth of lore and history. Like I was so sure that this was like planned out and that you had like a big like board that had like bits and pieces and string around like pins and stuff. Like I was so sure while I was reading it, I was like, this definitely planned.
Like the Charlie Day meme,
Yeah, it was really impressive feat. I think for me, your book was amazing in all aspects, but for me, what got me is because I love those morally gray characters, and even the protagonist, I would argue, is a morally gray character. And but in saying that, I love the theme of religious zealots, and what they will do for the sake of their religion, and how their religion comes into conflict with their other ideals. And in this case, in Gunmetal Gods, I mean, wow, you had, as I put in my review, I think the big thing was seeing someone like Mick of the Metal, have this antipathy towards the clergy, right? didn't like the clergy that organized the people who were running the hierarchy of the organized religion, but was this devout, obsessively devout, worshiper. And then, of course, when his faith comes into question, that throws everything just in total turmoil. It was just awesome. Like what made you what made that one of your themes in your book, if I may ask?
Yeah, that was a huge, I guess, driving theme for me to write the book, because both Kiva and Micah, uh, they struggle with their respective religions in certain ways. And for me, a lot of that was very personal in that, it comes from struggles I had like in my own life. And I think people tend to look at, you know, obviously in the world today, there's a lot of religious violence, but people tend to look at it very simplistically. Um, and they don't tend to understand, you know, the mentalities behind it. Because, at the end of the day, everyone is still a human being. And even if people have sort of these twisted ideas in their minds, it came from somewhere and it developed from somewhere. So a lot of the exploration that goes into that in Gunmetal Gods just comes from this desire to sort of understand this, like, what motivated, like, Micah, for example, what motivated him to have these sort of views where he dehumanizes the other side just because of their religion. But at the same time, you see that even though he does that, he's still, at his core, a human being. He still, you know, cares about, the people close to him. He still has, he still thinks of himself as good, essentially, and he still has these high-minded ideals. And I also wanted to show that we as individuals are not that far away from sort of dehumanizing the other side. It can happen. Very quickly, and we see that happening today. So this theme, especially that you brought up, I felt it was very relevant. Um, you know, Kind of to what we see going on. It's something that's never stopped being relevant. So and it's something that personally has interested me, and just something that you'll probably see in a lot of my books going forward. There'll always be some kind of uh, you know layer that either deals with religion or metaphysics or spirituality, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I loved that. I absolutely loved that. And like the all of the characters were just so, for lack of a better word, just raw and real. Just the epitome of human. And you just displayed the human experience just so beautifully in its raw chaoticness. And you're 100% right, is because we are all human. And like, I think that I'm right in this, and these are my morals. And I think that that makes me a good person. But someone else who grew up on the other side of the world has these different morals, and my morals to them are like, make me a bad person. And I sat on that for so long after reading it. I was just like, oh my goodness. And like, yeah, I just had to let that like just seep in. And even now I still think, like, I still have that conversation with myself. Like, it's insane.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, because, like, me personally, I spent the first 12 years of my life growing up in Saudi Arabia, and then I moved to Western Massachusetts. So these two places were obviously very, 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 very different in more ways than one. So I myself kind of saw how, I was in one environment where people thought completely differently. Um, but people were still, human beings, they just had different ideas. And then I moved to another environment where, again, people had completely different ideas for how you should live, but everyone was still a human being. Everyone still had these commonalities. And this was actually I moved 2 months before September 11. Uh, So I got to see firsthand, how kind of this clash of ideals occurred. And it wasn't, so since that happened at such a young age, I was 12 years old. It's always fascinated me, how how people can see the world so differently, um, and end up on opposite sides, and you know, s- s- still s- still fundamentally be human and be the same. And um, that's kind of why I want to write, is just to show that aspect of people.
It's just so amazing that I mean, I write about a lot of the same themes in my work, and it's funny, and I think that's what really I so immediately identified, Zamil, with what you were talking about. And the one thing I want to comment about your books is that, you take the idea of love and what love means, and not just romantic love, but loving your family, loving members of your adopted or assumed family, especially with Keva, because I love the fact that most of the janissaries they don't know who their biological parents are, they don't know, but they amass this family, you know in 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 Kevin's case, he amasses, a father and a daughter, a father who essentially is his trainer, is his sensei, and then a daughter that he adopts. Like, I just wondered as well, like, so we talked about religious aspect, what was it about the love aspect and the family aspect that that inspired you? I assume, again, it was perhaps personal experience, but a lot of the romantic relationships that, like, I feel so bad for Keva. He's just, he took it on the chin in that book in so many ways. And of course, did Micah. But can you tell us what made you write about love and relationships that way?
Sure. Um, so in regard to Keva, he's a janissary. So the Ottoman janissaries, they were taken at a young age from their parents when they were like, just like 4 or 5 years old. And they were brought basically into the system where they were trained to be soldiers and also sometimes trained to be bureaucrats. And I think a lot of people know that, but they don't realize, and this is something that I kind of did a lot of research on, um, how those janissaries kind of uh, created bonds with the people that they grew up with. So their teachers kind of became their fathers, and they would even call them, father. And the people that they grew up with, those were their brothers. So it really was quite literally like a found family situation where, you're taken from your real family and you basically get a whole new family. And it's all in the context, of this system where they're being trained for something, whether warfare or to lead a government or whatnot. So, and with Kiva, I just really wanted to explore that. If I kind of felt like, yeah, if you're taken at a young age from your parents, maybe you could go either way. You could become kind of very closed off, and you might not want to make bonds with anyone else, or you could become someone who really wants to make bonds with other people. So Kiva kind of is the latter, in a sense that he really wants to connect with people, but you know, bad things always happen to those people. So it kind of sends him sometimes spiraling down the wrong path. Then there's another character in the book who is becomes the Grand Vizier, basically Ebra. He's also a janissar, and he went through the same thing where he was taken from his family at a young age. But his approach is totally different. He's doesn't want to form these bonds with people. He just kind of sees people as these pawns that he wants to use to climb higher and higher. So that's a great question that you asked, because that was something that I really was very interested in, just from my own interest in Middle Eastern history, and in janissaries in particular.
To go back a little bit to the idea of gray characters that was mentioned earlier, I think one of the beauties of gray characters is they allow you as a reader to question your morality through them. So you'll find yourself agreeing with something a character does, and then on the next page you're like, wait, what the hell? Like that, wait a minute, I don't like you anymore. Right? So but you find yourself with this struggle of, you are able to understand the motivations of a character who's objectively not good, and it allows you to reflect on that yourself. So combining that with like the idea of religious being a societal construct of power and things like that, I really liked how you combined those two systems of like gray characters and morality with that. Because kind of as Lana mentioned, I was also sitting with that when I was reading. And that also does lead into the idea of love as well. You know, what is an acceptable form of love, and what is not. And is love shown, is like in the case of, I think you said Micah is how you pronounce his name? Micah. So in his case, his form of love was quite violent, and so it's just his way of showing that. And you could kind of see why he does it that way. And then you're like, wait a minute, why do I agree with this in this moment? So I really thought you did a really good job of showing great characters and using them in that potential. So I really wanted to make sure I said that before we moved on from that topic. But well done. I had many thoughts inside my head doubting why I agreed with these people. So
yeah,
well done.
that always interests me, because like when I read history, you'll often see that a lot of people, or a lot of the great figures that we talk about, they'll do something really terrible, and we just won't be able to wrap our heads around it. And I guess I kind of wanted to explore what would cause someone to do that. And one of the things I realized was that, if you're in a position of power, it's just not very simple. Like, I think in the book, there's sometimes these situations where, and this is kind of common in Grimdark as well, where a character has to choose between mercy and dealing out some kind of punishment. And sometimes they'll choose mercy, and that will come back to bite them in the ass later, where the guy that they spared will come and try to kill them later or something. And so I kind of, and when you're in a position of power, if you allow yourself to get killed, your whole kingdom could destabilize and it could cause chaos. So I kind of really wanted to get into this whole thing where, it's not always clear what the right thing to do is, because there's so many factors you have to weigh. And that's also one of my favorite things about Grimdark, is that it explores that, that whole aspect.
So I want to get to Fine Reed's comments really quickly. Yes, the morally gray, and that there is no clear black and white. I love the backstory of Mika and Keva, if I pronounced that right, showing where they were coming from and why they ended up the way they did, and also adds what they used to justify their actions. So good.
Yeah, I the one thing you were mentioning, Zamil, and you had noted that George R. R. Martin was potentially one of your inspirations for your writing, and I wrote this in my review, and I love the fact one thing you definitely share with George R. R. Martin, besides the talent, is that you have absolutely zero compunction whatsoever about killing off whoever, right? And that for me in a book, that is just a hallmark of a great writer, because when you can make the reader attached to certain characters, and you're great at drawing these characters and making them so engrossing, and then you get people to care about them one way or another, whether they're morally gray, whether they're outright good, regardless, and then you take them off the board. Like, that's just so it's such a beautiful emotional shock to the system. And I'm just wondering, like, was that something that was more purposeful, or was that just you felt that needed to happen for the sake of the story? Like what was the rationale behind that aspect of your book that you were like, no one was safe?
Yeah. When you establish that no one is safe, it just increases the tension for the entire story. And so when a character gets into a dangerous situation, you as a reader don't really know if they're going to survive that, or if they're going to come out of it in a, not fully themselves, maybe, or if they're going to survive unscathed. And I think that putting that tension into the story, especially since it's about war, since it's about this conflict that can't be reconciled, since there are a lot of scenes of where battles take place, putting that in and establishing that early was very important to driving up the stakes and making sure there was constant tension throughout. And also it was part of I guess it was part of growth, or it was part of you know the character struggle, in that the whole theme of the story is how to deal with loss, how to process grief, what happens when you don't process the grief and you just let it fester, what happens when that grief just turns to anger and rage, and you allow that grief to basically turn you into a monster, where you paint everyone on the other side with the same brush, consider all of them as being responsible for the death of your loved one, what that does to you, how it makes you humanize the other side. I think that's just so fundamental to the whole story. So it kind of had to be like that.
I respect that it had to be like that, but I want to put on the record, if anything happens to Kin, I will riot. Okay? I will riot. I have to put that on record.
I second that.
Yeah, he's a fun character. I enjoyed writing him a lot.
If I can sneak in another quick question here, it takes a lot of skill to have these two major POV characters and weave their story together so seamlessly to that you don't know how they're gonna butt up against each other. You know what's gonna happen, but you don't quite know how. But then you get the shocker and the twist of how they're actually really connected, and it's just amazing. And they wind up meet each other at a very low point, right? Like it's just how hard was it to bring that all so together in that fashion that and then you really feel this sense of almost sympathy for both of them at the same time where they're at, right? At that moment when they finally are brought together before all the cataclysmic stuff starts erupting. Like how was that for you? How did you find that?
Yeah, that was having the 2 points of view and having them sort of dueling each other throughout the whole story. That was how, from the beginning, I wanted to set up the story. Because sometimes when you read multi-point of view stories, for a lot of the time, in the beginning and the middle of the story, you're not sure how the points of view are related. But with Gunmetal Gods, I wanted to establish that immediately, just to get that tension in there that, these two sides are opposing each other and it's pretty much irreconcilable. And even when Kiva and Micah were separated by distance, I still tried hard to make their stories relevant and affect each other, so that decisions made by Micah would affect Kiva and his point of view and vice versa. And even though at the time Micah didn't even know who Kiva was, he wasn't aware that such a person existed, they were affecting each other and sort of dueling indirectly, and then they come much closer together toward the end of the book until they actually confront each other. So this was kind of in my mind from the beginning, that I wanted the story to be this way. I wanted it to be just to reflect the whole theme of the book. I wanted it to be two sides fighting each other, and I didn't want there to be like a cop out where they make peace at the end and they settle their differences. I wanted it to be there's no way to settle your difference. This is a zero sum game, you know. Either this city is mine or it's yours, that kind of thing. And I felt like that was the best way to explore, you know, all the themes that we've already talked about, and not to kind of you know, just kind of end it in a way that everything that came before doesn't matter. So yeah, it was definitely a challenge, and but it was one of the challenges that I took on very happily and, you know, just enjoyed tremendously.
And we'll fall down on that. So I guess we'll go ahead and let's go ahead and put up the spoiler banner so that way we can get into spoilers. And we can still, you know, other questions of course. But so just to let everyone over, we'll be going into spoiler territory. So if you haven't read the book, go read it. So who wants to get into the spoiler chat? I guess I will. So, go ahead, Taylor.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
just writing off of what I'm putting this way, writing off of what Zamil said about the end not being a cop out. So when Kiva followed Micah into the labyrinthos at the end, I was like, are they gonna like shake hands? Like, is this gonna end happy? And then when it didn't, I was like, yes. Like, I really appreciated that ending. I didn't know how you were gonna do it, but I was really happy that you chose to keep it as like these guys cannot reconcile. You know, even when Micah was like, well, let me just try to talk to him. Like he's talking to the horrible like death god. He's like, just let me talk to him for a minute. I was like, oh no. But you definitely did not take that cop out. And I just wanted to ride off of what you just said. Like that was a great moment in the book when you did that.
Yeah, they don't even speak the same language, so they can't talk to each other anyway. But yeah, you know, that does annoy me sometimes when you have. I think a good example of that is the Batman versus Superman movie. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's like they marketed it as this epic fight between Batman and Superman, but no, not really. You know, they kind of team up and you know, it just goes in a predictable direction. But so I really wanted to actually write a story where the characters, and you might sympathize with both, you might sympathize with neither, but I wanted them both to not be able to reconcile. Yeah.
And Fine Reads has a question. What was your thought process for the Lovecraftian angels and gods and how they fit into the history heavy plot?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I love cosmic horror. You know, I love horror in general, and I wanted, you know, I wanted the story to have these horror elements, and I wanted to put them in the lore as well. So, you know, when you have there was kind of an idea that I had, and it was to think, well, what would happen, or um, how would people come to grips with the idea that the god that they're worshiping might be evil, might be an entity that you know, is very powerful, uh, but is not well intentioned or is just apathetic toward humanity. And this is something cosmic horror really plays with. Um, so I wanted to put that in there, and I wanted to explore it. Um, you know, and at the same time, you know, the different people in the story, they obviously regard their own gods as being like the best thing ever. Um, but then, you know, obviously this is spoiler free, so I'll just talk freely. but you know, by the end, it's kind of shown that the gods are actually, you know, kind of from this. They have their own history, and they're feuding with each other, and they're using human beings as pawns. And so, you know, the humans themselves are lacking agency in this own conflict, which they themselves think is just between them. And it's kind of something that the gods are there directing in a way. So I think Lovecraft and the whole aesthetic of Lovecraft and all those monsters and all those ideas, and the idea that going closer to these gods can cause madness, and you know, just even looking upon them can cause madness. I think all of that kind of fit very well with this whole idea.
And you mentioned about the one thing like that surprised me about was all the twists and turns. Did those come to you? Did you see those coming from far away when you as you were writing, or did it just happen spur of the moment?
Uh, I think one of the big twists is that um, Asher is Kiva's wife, Lunara, and that was something that I planned from the very beginning. Um, and then there's also one of the key twists is that Kiva's daughter and Micah's daughter are the same person. So that's another big twist, and I wanted these twists to sort of show that, yeah, even though Kiva and Micah are on opposite sides and they hate each other, and you know, they don't speak the same language, they actually have affection for the same two people. Um, you know, at the end of the day. So that was something that I did kind of conceive beforehand, and the challenge, it was a challenge while I was revising to kind of play with, well, how much should I foreshadow it? How many, you know, hints should I pepper through the story? Um, because some beta readers would see it immediately, and others would just be like completely shocked out of their minds. So, you know, that kind of thing is, I think, a challenge as a writer. You know, how do you foreshadow those things? And then the other twist, which this one I kind of came up with very late, was that the Imperator Heraclius would come back from the dead. So this one, it was supposed to be Melody who comes back, but I kind of at the last minute thought, well, that wouldn't make sense for the god to bring her back. The god, you know, this god is trying to has its own agenda that doesn't quite fit with Micah's, so she's gonna bring Imperator Heraclius back instead. So yeah, it's some of them are planned, some of them just kind of come up, and you know, you try to make them work in the context of the story.
Those were awesome, by the way. Those twists were those twists are phenomenal. They blew me away. So I just want to quickly ask, because you write grim dark fantasy. I do the same, and I know as a writer, there's always that balance between when you're writing scenes that are violent scenes that are disturbing. You're not trying to glorify or make things gratuitous, but at the same time, it's part of life. It's integral to the story, and you're writing. And for me, I'm telling you, man, like, and it's not that I haven't read more graphic scenes, but when Shah Murad, when his family and when the children get killed, I was like, oh damn, were those scenes difficult to write? I know for me, I kind of it's like an out of body thing. I write them and I read them, it's like, wow, that was pretty dark. But it's later on that it really hits me. Like, how is it for you writing those kind of scenes? That was a very impactful and very well done scene, by the way. But it hits you right here, right? So
Yeah. Uh, what's interesting about that scene is when I wrote it, it wasn't all that detailed, but then I sent it to the editor, and she was like, you need to make this like 10 times more detailed. It's too static. So part of the reason, I think, and that was actually good advice, because that is a very important scene, in that it shows that these stakes aren't really a joke. You know, this whole thing that happens where the city has changed hands all of a sudden, and you know, a new side controls it now. Uh, this is the highest stake possible. You know, people's lives are going to end, and there's no prejudice toward whose life that is, whether it's a child, whether it's, you know, someone who's completely innocent, has nothing to do with the fighting. It doesn't matter. You know, it's a political calculus that, you know, Micah is making, and you know he's gonna do what he's gonna do. And it shocks me also when I read history, in that you see people who you might even admire. You might think, wow, this guy's a hero. You know, Alexander the Great, for example, he killed his own infant brother and sister. A lot of people don't know that, but he did it to secure his own power. So, how do these great people with these huge, incredible visions for their society and for the world, how do they do these things, and then go to work the next day, or, you know, go to sleep? Um, so I really wanted to explore that, and I didn't want to cop out and make it, you know, fade to black, and then, oh, this happened while we faded to black. I wanted to show the reader very, very viscerally that this is what happens when you know, when there's a outcome in a war. Um, and I wanted to explore that. So I got a lot of flack for it from reviews, and that's, you know, that's, I think that's perfectly valid. A lot of people don't want to read that kind of thing, uh, but it is something I had to do for the story to be told.
I think it had to be in there. Like, it wasn't pleasant, but like, because it was gut wrenching. There's like these beautiful innocents being slaughtered, and it hit hard. And I think like it I wanted that impact. Like, I like to feel things when I'm reading, and I definitely felt that. I felt quite a few things while I was reading this, but I think that it was, especially with like the going back to the like morally gray characters. Like, there are so many times where, like, especially like with like having lost Melody, like, oh well, then that's not going to happen. Like, surely these innocents won't be slaughtered, but no, yeah, they will. And it just solidified, like, I don't know how to explain it, but it just solidified like the humanness and morally grayness, and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, to go off of that, I had to take a walk. I actually had to walk it off. So after I read that scene, like with the when the drowning happened, I was like, I need a minute. I need, you know. So, but I needed, after, you know, getting over the horror of reading that scene, as Lana said, the you realize it needed to be there, because after that you realize, like, well, this guy's gonna do fucking anything, so, you know, so I better get ready. So it definitely had the intended impact, you know, that you wanted. And just before, when you mentioned about the plot twists and stuff, and how some of them came earlier and some of them came after, I want to say that for me as a reader, the foreshadowing timing was perfect, because when it's revealed that Lunara is the same person, right? Before that happened, when Kiva started crying, that's when I realized. So it's just a couple pages before, and I was like, no, you know, and then it was just very satisfying to realize right before, and then have the reveal. So the timing worked really well for me as a reader. You nailed that.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
That's something that I, through all the drafts, I wrestled with it. You know, so I'm glad it worked out for some readers.
You know, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say I was exactly the same with that part, and also when they realized that their daughter was one and the same. I was just like, is it no, is it? And then just before it was like solidified, I was like, oh my god, it is. Oh my god, oh my god.
I'm glad. That's the reaction I want, definitely, as a writer.
I'm a big history buff too, and that's part of what inspires my writing. And I know you had said that you a lot of Gunmetal Gods and the series is based on the Crusades, and that's a huge part of history that I'm fascinated with. And when you think of these larger life characters on opposite sides, like Richard the Lionhearted and Saladin, and you like. So did you have any of those characters from the Crusades in mind when you, because I immediately saw where this was going, right? This holy city that that both sides want, that both sides feel they're entitled to, and that's changed hands with these different religions. Like I like, was there were there particular inspirations of the characters though, with some of those the people that warred for a place like Jerusalem, with like a Saladin or Richard the Lionhearted, or were there inspirations for that?
Yeah, absolutely. The two people you mentioned, Saladin and Richard the Lionheart, they're exactly like what I've been describing. They're very complicated people who did some really great things, and they did some really awful things, both of them. And they're celebrated in history by their respective sides, um, and that's something I absolutely wanted to explore. In particular, with the Crusaders, when you read a lot of the things about them as they were preparing for the first crusade, as they were getting ready, as they were talking among each other, you see there's a lot of this. You kind of get that there is some good intention here. They want to protect the pilgrims. They want to help the Byzantine emperor out. They have all these great intentions, uh, but then once they actually go through this whole process of first entering into enemy territory, and the reality of the situation comes to them, and they're bogged down in this absolutely brutal war, and then once they actually enter Jerusalem and conquer it, um, it's kind of crazy to see what they did once they actually conquered the city. It was just a complete bloodbath, and pretty much no one was spared, with some exceptions. So part of the story is just, well, how did they go from these well-intentioned people to literally committing a massacre, which even historians who were with the Crusaders, they were shocked. They were just like, whoa, this is too much for us as well. There's like blood in the streets reaching up to our knees, and why is this happening? So that was something that very much interested me, exploring that. And then when you go to the other side, uh, I think in particular from Muslim history, you do also have kind of a mirror image where you have people who are very well intentioned, who Saladin, for example, he wants to reclaim the city for his faith. He wants to unite the Muslims who were very fractured at the time. And he did some great things, but he also did some bad things. I think he's very much lauded for his humanity, and that there's a lot of truth to that. But there were some situations where he executed prisoners for no reason. So he's not a saint either. So you have complicated people on both sides, who are very, from one perspective, they look very valiant, very, very, pure of heart, very heroic. But then they're faced in certain scenarios with situations where their darkness does come out. So I just love that aspect, and it's all throughout history. And I wanted to put that, into Gunmetal Gods as well.
And I like that you didn't shy away from, about, I think in fantasy too, there's these big, massive armies, and no one thinks, well, how are they going to feed all these people? These big, marching armies, and once they conquer the city and everything goes upside down. I like that you didn't shy away from, well, how are we going to eat? How are we going to feed everyone? Those are the things you don't really see a lot in fantasy. That, of course, you have to feed everyone. And I wondered on my notes as I was reading, I wondered, is it better to be executed right away, or is it better to be taken prisoner? Which, because which is worse? I wouldn't know if I was in that position.
Yeah, that's a great question. Because yeah, I think in certain situations people do start to envy the dead, and they do start to wish, I wish I was just one of those people who died on the first day, and now it's day like 150, and things are absolute hell, in whatever context they're in. So that is something that I did think about. um and yeah, like you said, when I did sort of picture this story also as a military fantasy, in the sense that I'm very much into battles, like into reading about battles, into researching them, and especially medieval armies. Um, how does a battle take place? What do you need? This 60,000 army just marched across a whole continent. What do they need to actually, go on? How do they survive once they've come into this new territory? So I wanted to put all of this in there, and I wanted to make it, um, as authentic feeling as possible in that regard, because it's just something that fascinates me tremendously as well.
Steve, I like that you mentioned like how you also thought, would you have preferred to just be one of the people that died, or to like stay on and survive, but under what condition? And I asked myself the same thing too, and I straight up was like, I would have rather died.
Yeah, when that first wall comes down, let that stone crush me. I'm good. Like I came to the same conclusion. Like, make it quick, make it fast. I'm not trying to stick around. So, when you're faced with the reality, not much of a choice,
Yeah.
really there.
I think the hardest thing about and what I loved about Gunmetal Gods too was to see how broken the survivors were, and what kind of mental state they were left in. Like Keva just got devastated, right? The Shah, Murat, like the people who survive, have really dealt with a lot, and you wonder, and I can't wait to get to Conqueror's Blood. You wonder how they're going to pick up the fragments of their damaged psyche and manage to to move on, right? So I loved how I mean, I know the people that survived, as we talked about, would you rather die or survive? Well, the people that survive, they may have lived through the actual event, but they're extremely scarred emotionally, right? So that's not easy either.
Yeah, that was like when I'm writing, I try to give the characters, that dimension, that psychological dimension, where you don't just brush off like something cataclysmic or something, traumatic that happened. It kind of, you carry it through the whole story, and it kind of becomes a situation where Kiva is just acting out of his traumas, and Micah is acting out of his traumas, and they're just going at each other just based on these things alone, and it's blinding them from understanding each other, even though they kind of went through the same thing. So there's a lot of irony in there as well. But that was definitely very much at the core of why I wrote the book, because it is all about that theme of processing grief, and how if it's not done properly, whether it's as an individual or as a society as well, if it's not done properly, it can just you know kind of produce this outcome where your whole focus is toward killing your enemy, instead of actually moving on in a healthy way.
Yeah, something I'm really interested to read. Obviously, I'm not telling you what to do with the next book. Can't wait to get to it because it's already finished. But I assume because of where we leave Kiva, how he has to purge himself, I'm really interested to see the contrast between just ignoring all of that, just erasing yourself versus dealing with it and dealing with your trauma. So I think in Gunmetal Gods specifically, this was pretty obvious, not obvious, but it was present with the gods themselves. So I never thought I'd be terrified of a starfish, but here I am, So I really liked the way that you had this like not moral, just amoral creation. Like it wasn't good, it wasn't bad, it was just creation for creation's sake. But the removal of that morality and the suffering via trauma and not having consequences for what you do, you just create and that's it. Seeing that contrasted with people who are really suffering because of things they've created, things they've done, and seeing that both can create a horror in a different way. I really, really liked your exploration of that, and I'm excited to get more of it in the next one because I'm assuming we will. But yeah.
Yeah, that was, it's always tricky when you want to have gods in the story, and because when we think of gods, we think of them in our own through our own lens, like, oh, they must care so much about us. We're their whole focus, we're it's very human centric. So I wanted this story to kind of be like, well, yeah, the humans think it's human centric, but when you actually encounter any of these gods, it's not, and there's kind of this stark difference in what people believe and what when they and then when they actually encounter the god. um so yeah, that definitely in book 2 that gets explored a lot more, and in book 2, I won't spoil anything, but that's a big thing, is because now the gods are out of the bag. They're out of the bag. The readers know that they're there, so there is more exploration of that.
Yeah, I love the capricious gods. And the other thing I really want to see is because in Gunmetal Gods, revenge is a central theme, right? Revenge drives, the characters for a lot of what they do, right? Mika wants to get back the people that took his daughter, and Keva, after Melly is killed, wants to get Mika. And it's so much of it, you wonder, now that the revenge factor for Kev is kind of removed, like the focus of his revenge is kind of, you wonder, like, it's almost like there might be a feeling of emptiness, like what's left now, right? That how does he fill himself back up? He's lost the woman he loved. He's lost so much, right? But more than that, the target, his focus, the thing that kept him going, the focus of his revenge has also been removed. So, what's going to drive him to be motivated? Because the Shah's not done with him, right? He's still this heroic. He's a mage. He's a magist. He's still got these powers. Like, he's still very valuable. So, but what's going to motivate him to go on and do the things he needs to do now that he's lost so much? So that's going to be interesting to see.
Well, that was a challenge for me as a writer, because I wrote Gunmetal Gods to function as a standalone, because I didn't know I was going to be writing a sequel when I wrote Gunmetal Gods, because it all really depended on whether I'd have the time to do it, whether Gunmetal Gods would succeed, and all these kind of factors. So I kind of wanted to have the book function as a standalone, but have the opportunity to write a second book. So yeah, you pointed out the thing that was the most challenging for me, is that Kiva's motivation is gone by the end of the first book, and he's kind of told by Lot, by the god, just stop having any motivation at all. Just get rid of all your all your earthly emotions and just focus entirely on what I want you to do, is taking up this role on my behalf, and that will save you from suffering if you do that, because you will transcend all your grief, all of this stuff. So Kiva's kind of in an interesting place on that regard, and he's agreed. He said, yeah, okay. He's signed up for this task. Probably he realizes he's had enough as well. So yeah, that was a big challenge in going into book 2, and that's why when you read book 2, you'll be surprised in the early chapters by what's going on. and by the focus as well. But you know, I actually feel like the second book, Conqueror's Blood, is better than the first one, and I think it's the best book I've ever written. Um, so I can't wait for you guys to read it, and you know, it's quite different from the first book. It's the focus is different, but at its heart, it is the sequel to Gunmetal Gods, and it deals with a lot of the same themes, and it continues the story. So, but when you start reading it, it might seem quite jarring. So let me put that warning out.
Okay.
And Josephine also loved it a lot. She liked it more than the first book. So I was glad, to hear that.
Now, Fine Reads has a couple questions. Are we getting more of the Nas Nas? Sorry, blanking on the name. And when are we getting book 3? Because I already want to reread the series. And will there be more novellas like Death Rider, which was also fantastic? Of course, no pressure. So, we'll be getting more of the Nas Nas, blanking on the name. And when are we getting book 3?
So the Nas Nas are a kind of jinn that is very mischievous. So Kin is, oh, my rabbit just ran by my feet, my foot. So Kin I think is kind of a good example of that, of like a mischievous jinn. And well, in book 3, we'll probably have to see. There will definitely be a lot more of Kin in book 3. So that will definitely be the case. And we might see other Nas Nas as well. As for when book 3 will come out, it's definitely on my plan to get it out by the end of this year. So that, right now I'm actually writing book 1 of a totally different series. So I want to get that project done, and then I will start on book 3. And I have like, the story in my head, and I'm just really excited to start writing it, but I got to get this project done first, and then, I'll get to that full force. And the third question was about the novella. Right now I don't have any more novellas planned. But it could happen. I'll have to see after I finish book 3. But if I do write a novella, I kind of want the novellas to be these self-contained stories that take place in a different part of the world and explore something, very different, and just expand the world. So I would find that a lot of fun. And I think novellas as a writer are kind of like a depressuring, because they're short, and and especially if they're not too connected to the main series, you can have more fun with them. So yeah, that could be something that I do maybe in 2023.
Just some feedback on the novella thing. Obviously, you do what you want, but with the big history you've presented us with, I would eat up any novellas talking about like the big battles that were mentioned in Gunmetal Gods. I'm there yesterday. So just as feedback for novellas, like I would eat that up, because, I think Lana mentioned in the beginning, everyone mentioned that the lore and the history is so rich and available. So anything going into that, I'm on board for.
Yeah, Death Rider is actually about a battle that takes place like 15 years before the events of Gunmetal Gods. So that's one of the battles that's mentioned when Kiva, I think it's when Kiva is like rowing his boat, and he's thinking about some battle where he was marching, and they were, chanting songs, and they were just going through, Crucius and conquering towns and stuff. So it's kind of set in that period, and it's set in a specific siege that was going on. So yeah, I would definitely enjoy. I enjoyed writing it a lot, just because it was kind of set in, in a period in the past, and it was just, it's just fun to expand the world, and to look into past events, and to show readers that this is not just something on the page that's mentioned. It's something that actually did happen, and so yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Oh, perfect! I'm even more excited now.
I just wanted to quickly say that I said this in my review that overall, man, your book was phenomenal, and it's quite an accomplishment to be a semifinalist in the self-published fantasy blog off, which you were this year in 7. But I know that past years have been tough too. But I think the competition was so the caliber was so high this year. But I honestly believe, I'm not just saying that, in any other year your book would have gone through the finals. I think it was just that good. I've read a lot of Spiffbo stuff, and like, yeah, yours is it's amazing. So hats off to you.
Yeah, I mean, it was Spiffbo is pretty awesome for getting discovered. I think you reach a lot of new readers, and it was also pretty cool to win the cover contest pretty early on. So I'm glad Gunmetal Gods got technically I won Spiffbo cover contest. So I could say that. But yeah, it was a really, like, some of the books, even some of the semifinalists are like crazy high quality books. Even books that weren't semifinalists that were out in the first round, crazy high quality books. So it just shows like how self-publishing is coming along, and the standard is maybe higher than traditional publishing at this point. So I was happy to be a part of the whole thing.
I just want to say shout out to Lana for letting me know about self-publishing. It was due to she did a readathon that was specifically about self-publishing, and that's what introduced me to Gunmetal Gods and all of the other self-publishing books I've really fallen in love with. So just need to give credit there. So it's definitely expanding, and with people doing readathons focused on just that, or Steve sharing these these chances to have discussions, it's growing, and it's really cool to see. Really cool.
Yeah, I don't think people quite understand how pervasive self-published, especially fantasy, is, and the fact that I think the line between traditional publishing and self-publishing is really becoming very blurred. And I think I know for us in the writing community, we look at each other as authors, right? We're in chat groups, and we're in groups together, and it's self-published authors, traditionally published authors. I think perhaps for a while there was that sense of maybe there was not necessarily with any one person or any group of people, just a bit more elitism maybe in terms of the trad authors being on of a different level than the self. I think that stigma is really disappearing though, because of the quality of self-published fantasy, and I don't know, I always talk about this, that I predict that in 10 years I don't know if traditional publishing will still exist in the form that it does exist. I think that predominantly it'll be self-published fantasy, and it'll only be a select group of people that will, ex-presidents, movie stars, or someone with that, if you're Brandon Sanderson, you'll always have a trad contract, right? But for the rest of us, I think even top caliber independent writers, I think self-publishing is going to be what dominates the landscape. I think there's going to be a flip. I think the flip's already happening, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, there are authors like Will White who outsell like all this. Maybe he's in the top 5 of fantasy authors in regard to sales. So he's self-published. So yeah, anything is possible. The sky's the limit, I feel, with self-publishing, which is awesome.
It kind of reminds me of the music industry in the late 90s, early 2000s. So you saw that change coming to digital. That's what it kind of seemed we're on the horizon of that in the publishing industry. But if Lana, if you want to close us out with your thoughts on Gunmetal Gods and what you expect, what a prediction for book 2.
I don't have any predictions. I'm
no
pressure.
Pressure.
Figure it out.
Like I said in my review of this one, I was just a passenger in the car, like hanging on for dear life, hoping that it didn't explode. And I'm very much looking forward to being a passenger again in the second one. But yeah, no, I absolutely love this, and yeah, I'm so excited for the next one. I'm so glad I have a physical copy, because before I read the second one, I want to annotate. I'm like a little annotator. Before I go though, I did have one question. I'm so sorry, Steve.
Go.
Where did you get, because there are so many things that I highlighted in my Kindle, like so many quotes. Where was the inspiration for some of these? Like, there are so many things that I want on a t-shirt or on a coffee mug or something.
Yeah.
Where'd the inspiration for these like words of wisdom or just really insightful or impactful like sentences come from?
A lot of it is just when I'm sitting there revising and I'm looking at like, I have like I've highlighted like a certain section of the dialogue, and I'm just thinking, well, I need to make this better, and then I just sit there for like 30 minutes and come up with something. But then some of it is actually like whenever Kiva quotes poetry, some of it is actually from Rumi. So I'll take like some of Rumi's poetry and I'll remix it a little bit, and I'll put it in. I'll remix it so it fits with the context better, and it sound like it doesn't sound just like completely ununderstandable. So I'll change it up, and then I'll put it in there. So yeah, I think it's also when you have a character like Kiva who himself enjoys a lot of poetry. I myself was kind of challenged to make him sort of more of a deep thinker and to view life sort of in a reflective way. And so, when you challenge yourself in that way as a writer, you will hopefully end up producing some good nuggets of dialogue.
And Fine Reads has one of relatable.
Can I know we got to go. Can I quickly read this one? There were so many great ones, but this one, for whatever reasons, it really stuck with me. We die, Sadie, so others don't. We'll kill each other so others don't have to kill for us. We go willingly into exile to spare our subject to suffering. What else can I tell you? This is our curse. Like, this is really impactful stuff, man. Like, it was.
Thank you.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah, that one was fun to write. I think I was trying to get in the head of an Ottoman sultan. I was really going in deep, and power is not always fun. It's not always fun in games. If you look at Roman emperors, like 70% of them were killed by assassination
killed
or something, right? So it's not fun. It's not like a party. I would not want to ever want to be a Roman emperor or an Ottoman sultan, or even in their families, because the families often just get killed off by like an uncle or something. So yeah, I wanted to show that it's not fun in games.
Yeah, or medieval King of England or France, or you name it, right? Yeah, it was violent times. Not saying that these aren't violent times, but very different. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, as they say, right? So
absolutely, that's the perfect quote.
Definitely. And another quote from Fine Reads: wielding a sword in battle felt so unfamiliar, it might as well have been a giant cucumber. Had I regressed so much in 10 years.
That's what I love about Keva. I know he gets back his youth and all that, but that he's old, he's out of shape, he knows he's kind of lost it. His daughter can kick his ass now. Like, it was just like, I loved what you did with him at the beginning of the book, where he's kind of washed up, and he's being it's his reputation that the Shah is relying on, right, as being this the only warrior that killed a Magus. But yeah, I love the fact that he comes back, he's like, oh man, I ain't got it anymore. Like, yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah, I love those kind of characters. Reminds me of Thor in in Avengers Endgame. I love that kind of thing.
People were laughing at him and making fun of him and kind of, yeah, it was great what you did with him.
Yeah, it's
Just
great.
close it a bit, things like that. Taylor, you want to go next?
With my predictions or
Yeah,
just
with
closing thoughts kind of thing?
closing thoughts and
Okay.
predictions.
Okay. I did not think about it in the time you gave me between Lana and I, but I would say predictions for the future. I think Sadie is going to do some stuff that's really important. I think she's going to be key because there was a lot of effort put into making sure that she was still there. I don't really have like specific plot points, I suppose, that I have predicted, but more the themes that I previously talked about. So the themes of comparing, is it worth trauma, to deal with it and struggle with it, or is it worth it to just not deal with it, be like a god that doesn't touch it, which Kiva might become. I'm not sure. But where we left him, he might become that. So I'm really looking forward to playing with those themes and delving into the world of gods. Kin, you told me there's going to be more of him, so that just made my day. I'm so excited for that. Actual predictions outside of that, not so much. But closing thoughts. I also want to mention you had said that this book was like fast paced, and I just want to say that I appreciate that you didn't necessarily take that away, because I'm a epic fantasy reader, so it's always, a lot of it is slow, and it's what I'm accustomed to, and I love taking time and sitting in a world. And so at first it was kind of like getting on an escalator at the wrong speed at first, because I wasn't used to the quick pace. But kind of by the end of it, it's like you couldn't imagine another speed. It's like when you listen to an audiobook on 2 times speed, and then you get used to it. And then by the end, you can't imagine 1 time. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate you showing me, like, there's another way to do epic fantasy. Like, fast pace can work for that. Because by the end of it, I couldn't put it down. So just wanted to throw that appreciation out there, that's not like a critique when people say it's fast paced, So, and it'd been a while since I'd read an epic fantasy that had that. So that would be my final thoughts on there. Yeah.
Someone said it was like a trilogy in one book, which can be a good thing or can be a bad thing. So, it's a lot of people did enjoy the pace, and pacing is just something which is, I think, very particular to the reader. But yeah, a lot of epic fantasy is slow paced, and just really, the books are like this big. So I did kind of want to do something different with Gunmetal Gods, and I guess it's just my natural pace as a writer as well. It's just to go fast.
It worked. It definitely worked.
Cool. Nice to hear.
Well, I
And
guess.
Stuart,
Yeah, well, in terms of pace, and I'm not a mood type reader. I love fast paced books. I love slow. I probably prefer the slower paced books when it comes to epic fantasy, and that's more what I write. At least some of my books, but to Melody's points, yeah, it worked. Like, it was kind of like, I don't know if anybody here has read Evan Winter and Rage Rig, like phenomenal, like just constant, like you're always up here, like, oh my god, like, and by the according to the book, that's where we were with your book, Zamil, but it was awesome. I just want to say quickly, just again, it was a phenomenal book. You're a must-buy author. I'll be buying anything you write. I love romance as an element in fantasy. I'm a romance fan too, and I'm also a shipper. So I think now that Kevin's kind of single, maybe him and Nezrin will maybe we'll pick up where they left off, because maybe she'll kind of bring him out of his funk now, because there seemed to be something there. At the beginning, maybe it was just kind of one of those heat of the moment things. They're about to die, and that kind of. But now that he's single, maybe we'll see if something happens there. It's not a prediction, but I want to see if something goes down on that angle.
Yeah, I had. It's funny you mentioned Nesrin, because I had like I had all kinds of ideas in my head, like when I was writing the end of Gunmetal Gods, like maybe he should end up with Nesrin in the end, you know. So let's see what happens.
All right.
It's funny because I asked about, I usually try and ask about predictions, and then as you all were answering, I was like, I don't have any predictions. So I'm not really sure. I think Lana explained it perfectly. Is I'm just along for the ride. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I'm excited to get to it. That was the hardest part. Is I finished the book a couple of weeks ago, and I had to wait for this to start the next one. So that was the hardest part. But yeah, it was one of my favorites of the year. It's late January, but I can't see this not being my top list for the year already. So
Yeah.
really great job.
I think I read it last July, and it was one of my top 10 books of the year.
If I had read this last year, it would have definitely been in my top 10 books of the year. So yeah.
I hope you guys love the second book as much. I think I took like some big risks with it. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it as much as Gunmetal Gods.
Sure we will.
Yeah.
Well, we've
So
now
fun.
got the precursor to expect something different, right? So there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with different, So
Definitely. Well, this is such a special meetup because I love the book, and then it was so great to get all of us together, all around. We're all around the world. We met up to discuss this book that we all really enjoyed. So it's really great time. So I want to thank all of you for taking the time and weird out. We're all in different time zones, but thanks to all of you for coming by. And of course, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us and hear us gush over Gunmetal Gods.
Thank you guys so much. That as an author, this is like what we dream about. Discussing our characters and the world and the thought process that we went through. With awesome people like you. So thank all of you for reading the book and for I mean, you guys loved it, so that thank you for that. And thanks for coming to chat with me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for either waking up early or staying up late or just taking time out of your day. Thank you guys so much. It's been amazing. Thank you, Steve, for organizing this whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having us,
it's
Steve.
nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks for creating the space that you do to make sure
Yes.
that
Thank
there's,
you.
Yes,
an area to talk, because without you, this wouldn't have happened. So major props.
exactly.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh
definitely.
wow! Thanks for even the kind words. I appreciate it. That's one of the things I enjoy most is these kind of things, and I always walk away from these kind of discussions with a different perspective on whatever it may be. So it's one of my favorite things to do. So thanks to all of you for taking the time and coming by and chatting. And, it's great to hear all the different perspectives and all the some really great questions that I'm going to steal from all of you for my interviews. So just heads up. I will, That's really great. So thanks again to all of you, and I will put all of your links down below here when we're done, just to so everybody can find your channels and find Drowned Kingdom and that Stuart wrote, and of course the books that Zamil has written. So thanks all of you again. Thanks for everyone who came by to submit questions and interact with us. It's always a pleasure. So hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you so much. Amazing book, Gunmetal Gods.
Buy it.
Yeah.
Buy it.